Shalom, Hadavarniks. Welcome to Hadavar Messianic Ministry School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. We're studying the Jewish life of the Messiah, the 2021 edition, and we are in Lesson 4 now, where this is our 13th session together. So let's go ahead and review session number 12. In session 12, we saw Jesus move from Nazareth to Capernaum, and Capernaum was a major city right along the Via Maris, the trade route, so a very strategic city for Yeshua to move his headquarters to. And when he made that move, he fulfilled prophecy because Nazareth resides in the territory, the tribal territory of Zebulun, and Capernaum resides in the tribal territory of Naphtali. And so as Yeshua made that trip from Nazareth to Capernaum, he went from one tribal area to another, and therefore fulfilled prophecy. And then we saw him walking along the shore. Here's Capernaum. He was walking along the shore somewhere between Capernaum and Bethseda, and he called his disciples. Then he went into the synagogue at Capernaum and taught. After the synagogue service, he went to Peter's house and healed Peter's mother-in-law from her fever. There's Peter's house right there. Then we explored the fact that the Messiah has three eternal offices. He possesses three eternal offices, the office of prophet, priest, and king. But he does not function simultaneously in those offices. And right now, as we're studying his ministry, he's functioning as a prophet. This is the past during his 3.5-year ministry, the past on earth. Now, this is Galilee, where Yeshua was doing teaching tours, and his fame began to spread from Galilee all over the place, including Syria to the north into Gentile territory. Now, the theme I applied to our lives last time was that obedience must overrule experience. And obedience must overrule experience. And this brings us down to Lesson 4. That brought us to Lesson 4 in our 12th session. In Lesson 4, we saw that there were two types of miracles in rabbinic thinking. Those miracles anyone empowered by the Spirit of God could perform, and those miracles only the Messiah could do, messianic miracles. And there were three types of miracles only Messiah could perform: the healing of a Jewish leper, the casting out of demons of deafness and dumbness, and the healing of a man born blind. And the rabbinic reasoning, as I understand it, goes like this. Leprosy, or any one of these incurable diseases, leprosy is incurable by man. However, in the kingdom, all disorders and afflictions will be healed. And that's on the basis of Isaiah 35, 5 and 6. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, the lame will leap, the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. Therefore, the conclusion, the Messiah will have to heal all infirmities, including leprosy, when he arrives and institutes the kingdom. Then we explored an anti-missionary charge that Jesus could not have been pure, thus sinless, because he touched leprous and unclean dead bodies. In touching the leper, he became impure under the Mosaic law. Therefore, he did not perfectly keep the Mosaic law and cannot be the Messiah. Sounded very impressive and weighty until you examine the evidence. First of all, Isaiah 53:4, which is a messianic passage, as admitted by the rabbis, applies the word stricken to leprosy. We ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted, stricken with leprosy. Now, the word stricken to smite means to smite with the disease for sin. Was used when both Miriam in Numbers 12 and Uzziah in 2 Kings 15 were stricken with leprosy for their sins. Now, the Babylonian Talmud agrees. What is his, speaking of the Messiah, what is his name? What is the Messiah's name? The rabbi said his name is the leper scholar. And then they quote Isaiah 53 as their authority. He's the leper scholar, as it is written, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper. See that explanatory comment they put in? Two explanatory words. We did esteem him a leper, smitten by God and afflicted. So the The Messiah is associated with leprosy, and in fact, he is a leper himself in rabbinic thinking. So touching a leper and healing him was not a disqualification from messiahship. In fact, it was an authentication of messiahship. All right, that brings us to the new material. We're in Lesson 4, page 10, at the top of the page in your outline, if you've downloaded the outline. We're at section 53, forgiving and healing of a paralytic, covered by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, this incident is a direct result of the previous section. Now we see the Sanhedrin's representatives are present. We start in Mark chapter 2, verse 1. When he had come back to Capernaum several days afterward, it was heard that he was at home. So the place of this interaction is Capernaum in Galilee, and notice it's called his home. He's moved there permanently to Capernaum, and it's thought that Peter was living there permanently as well. And if you go to Capernaum on your trip to Israel, you'll see this sign at the entrance gate to the archaeological area, and it's Capharnaum, Capernaum, the town of Yeshua, the town of Yeshua. Yes, it is his home. All right, Luke chapter 5, verse 17. One day he was teaching, and there were some Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting there, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present for him to perform healing. Now, note, Galilee was not a popular place for the rabbis, yet from all over the country, rabbis have congregated in Capernaum. They've come from Galilee, short distance. They've come from a long distance, from Judea, from Jerusalem, all to Capernaum. Why? Well, this is the result of the events of section 52. This is their response to the challenge of the healing of a leper. Well, this means that Yochanan ben Zakkai was there. Who was Yochanan ben Zakkai? Well, he was a Pharisaic missionary who felt called to go to Galilee. He went to Galilee to spread Rabbinic Judaism, Pharisaic Judaism. And throughout his life, he became very well known. By the end of his life, he was the premier rabbi in Israel. His story is in article form at pages 10 through 15 of your outline. And you can find a detailed explanation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the book First Century Judaism in Crisis by Jacob Neusner. Now let me just share a few excerpts from that book. Sometime after the death of Hillel, Yochanan left Jerusalem for Galilee, where he settled in the village called Arav near Sepphoris. We do not know why Yochanan went to Galilee. Well, that may be true, but we know he went there to be a Pharisaic missionary at least. And that will be very evident in just a moment. We don't know why Yochanan went to Galilee. The region was not, as I said, a center of study of the Torah in the manner and traditions of the Pharisees. That's the very reason he went. In the 3rd century, Ula, an Amora in Palestine, stated, 18 years Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai spent in Arav, and only these 2 cases came before him. In 18 years, he was only asked to adjudicate, to give an opinion on 2 cases. At the end, he said, "O Galilee, Galilee, you hate the Torah. Your end will be to be besieged." In other words, he cursed Galilee as he left, saying, Galilee, you're going to be overrun by an army and to be destroyed by an army of some sort. Then in Encyclopedia Judaica, we read of his death. A moving account is given of his death. When he fell ill, his disciples went to visit him. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw them, he began to weep. His disciples said to him, "Light of Israel, pillar of the right hand, mighty hammer, why do you weep?" Now you see those titles that they call Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Light of Israel, pillar of the right hand, mighty hammer. Those titles all indicate that he was the prominent rabbi at that time. Why would the prominent rabbi weep at his death, on his deathbed? He replied, "If I were being taken today before a human king who is here today and tomorrow in the grave, whose anger, if he is angry with me, does not last forever, who, if he imprisons me, does not imprison me forever, and who, if he puts me to death, does not put me to everlasting death, and whom I can persuade with words and bribe with money, even so I would weep." Now that I'm being taken before the supreme King of Kings, who lives and endures forever and ever, whose anger is an everlasting anger, who, if he imprisons me forever, if he puts me to death forever, and whom I cannot persuade with words or bribe with money, nay, more, when there are two ways before me, one leading to paradise and the other to Gehinnom, and I do not know by which I shall be taken. Shall I not weep? So the most prominent rabbi in Israel at that time had no assurance of his salvation, no assurance of a right relationship with God. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is there in the Galilee, questioning and investigating Yeshua. Eventually he will reject Yeshua. He will join the rabbis in the rejection of Yeshua. And that has led to his estrangement from God. He doesn't know whether God will send him to paradise or to Gehinnom, to hell. Unfortunately, he was sent to hell because he did reject the messiahship of Jesus. All right, so that's a quick view of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Just remember, when we see the rabbis in Capernaum questioning Jesus and attacking him, remember, Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of those rabbis. Now, the Sanhedrin was obligated to investigate any messianic claim. So this is the first stage of the Sanhedrin's investigation, the stage of observation. They only observe. They ask no questions. The second stage is the stage of interrogation. That will come soon. Now we come to a healing. This is lesson 4, page 15, in the middle of the page on your outline. And we're looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 2 through 5. And many were gathered together so that there was no longer room, not even near the door. And he was speaking the word to them, and they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. Well, he's in Peter's house. Being unable to get to him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above his head. So Peter lost his roof here. And when they had dug an opening, they let down the pallet on which the paralytic was lying. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." So here's a picture of Peter's house, and that a hole was torn in that roof. And then here's an illustration of a man being let down through that hole in front of Jesus. So the palsied man, the paralyzed man, is brought to him, and Jesus does not directly heal him. Instead, he forgives his sin. Why? He knew it would raise the issue that it raises, verse 6. But some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts. Reasoning in their hearts. They're not vocal. This is the stage of observation. They can't ask questions. They can only observe. Well, Jesus isn't stopped by that they're reasoning in their minds. He goes ahead and he reads their minds. And this is a messianic claim according to Isaiah 11:3. Remember that? And he will delight in the fear of the Lord, and he will not judge by what his eyes see, nor make a decision by what his ears hear. The point: the Messiah will judge men by means other than seeing or hearing. This is a direct claim to messiahship. It's also a direct claim to deity. We also see this in the Shanchino books of the Bible about Isaiah. Yeshua reading minds is a messianic claim. The Shanchino books of the Bible, having already introduced Isaiah 11 as messianic, goes on to say, his perception will be so keen, it will be as though he smelled the facts. That's Ibn Ezra and Metzudat David's opinion. So the Messiah is going to have unusual perception, far different than your average human being. Then the Talmud in Sanhedrin 93b is summarized by Dr. Alfred Edersheim in Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. He says, it is inferred that the Messiah knew the thoughts of the heart. And it was added that as Bar Kokhba was unable to do this, he was killed. So Yeshua reading minds is also a claim to deity because only God can read minds. He's the Messiah and he is God in human flesh. 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks inner. Psalm 139, 1 through 4. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. There, reading his mind. You scrutinize my path and my lying down. You are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. Even before we speak, he knows the word that's going to come out. He knows what's going on inside us. 2 Chronicles 6:30, King Solomon prays, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, and forgive, and render to each according to all his ways, whose heart you know, for you alone know the hearts of the sons of men. God knows our hearts. And so Yeshua, reading minds, is a claim to deity as well as a claim to messiahship. All right, we move on now to Mark chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. But some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, why does this man speak that way? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Well, their theology is correct. Only God can forgive sins. Now, in rabbinic theology, men had a very limited ability to forgive sin. A man can only forgive sins directly experienced. And this comes from a rabbinic commentary on the New Testament by Rabbi Locks. There we read, in rabbinic Judaism, man could forgive a sin, but it was a moral imperative to do so when the sin committed was against himself, but not for others. For forgiveness is from God through direct access and not through an intermediary. All right, you can only forgive sins that were directly committed against you. But what did Yeshua do? What did Yeshua do? Yeshua forgave all the paralytic sins directly. The paralytic had not sinned against Yeshua. In other words, his statement is a plain-spoken and unmistakable claim to deity. Only God can forgive sin, and I forgave sin. God can forgive all of this man's sins whenever and wherever they occurred. That's only in the power of God. We move on to verses 8 and 9. Immediately Yeshua, aware in his spirit that they were reasoning that way within themselves, they didn't utter a word. They didn't utter an audible word. They uttered some words in their mind. He said to them, why are you reasoning about these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and pick up your pallet and walk? So verse 8, he's reading their minds again, claiming to be God, claiming to be the Messiah. In verse 9, it's easier to say that your sins are forgiven because no outward proof is possible. Now Yeshua is arguing from the lesser to the greater, from the minor premise to the major premise. This is called Kalva Homer reasoning in rabbinic thinking. It's easier to say your sins are forgiven. That's the minor premise. There's no outward proof required. It's harder to heal because that requires physical proof, visible evidence. This is the major premise. Outward proof is essential. We move on to verses 10 and 11. But so that you may know that the Son of Man, the Messiah, has authority on earth to forgive sins, he's also God, he said to the paralytic, I say to you, get up, pick up your pallet, and go home. In other words, to prove I have authority to forgive sins and to prove that I am God, I will provide you with the visible physical evidence. I will do the harder. Verse 12. And he got up and immediately picked up the pallet and went out in the sight of everyone, so that they were all amazed and were glorifying God, saying, we have never seen anything like this. And so immediate evidence is provided of the Messiah's authority, not only to heal, but to forgive sin, and this shows that he is God who can forgive sin. Now they have no basis for rejecting him. The evidence is right there on the table for them. However, lesson 4, page 15 at the bottom, this becomes a turning point. They will now look for reasons to reject him. Instead of accepting the evidence, they will try to reject the evidence. So in section 53, we see the first stage of the Sanhedrin's investigation. The stage of observation is complete. There will be a report to the Sanhedrin. The movement is very significant. The second stage, the stage of interrogation, will soon begin. We'll soon see the Pharisees asking questions and demanding answers from Yeshua. So now we're in lesson 4, page 16 at the top of your outline. Section 54, the call of Matthew, covered in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is the call of the next disciple, Matthew, number 7. Now Matthew is a publican. Now what is a publican? A publican was a local tax gatherer for the Romans. Publicans were allowed by Rome to extort additional amounts in excess of the required taxes from their fellow Jews. Thus, they were hated as Romanizers, and they were very, very wealthy. They were not eligible to be either judges or witnesses at a trial because they were considered so unreliable. Sanhedrin 25b. As to tax collectors and tax farmers, at first it was thought that they take only what is specified as the tax. Once they saw that they took more than the defined tax, they declared them invalid, and this is as a witness or as a judge. Now, if one member of a family was a publican, all other members of that family were considered likewise. Shavuot 39a said, Rabbi Shimon, if he sinned, what sin did his family do? But the verse intends to tell you, you have no family in which is found one tax collector that really is not entirely made up of tax collectors, or in which is found one robber that really is not entirely made up of robbers. Why? Because they afford protection to the one who is a tax collector or robber. In other words, they're accessories to the crime. What is an accessory? Well, there are two types of accessories. There's accessory before the fact. That's a person who, though not present during the commission of a felony, is guilty of having aided and abetted another who committed a felony. And then there's an accessory after the fact, a person who knowingly conceals or assists another person who has committed a felony. And so that's the family. They are concealing or assisting the tax collector. They're accessories to his crimes, and they're regarded as traitors and apostates, defiled by their frequent association with the heathen and willing tools of the oppressor. They were practically excommunicated from Israel. Now, lesson 4, page 16 in the middle. There were two classes of publicans, tax gatherers and customs house officials. The customs house official was the worst kind of publican. They had more freedom to extort than the tax gatherers had. Now, their objects of taxation were so numerous that modern scholars have not been able to identify them all. They taxed axles and wheels and pack animals and pedestrians and roads and highways and administration and admission to markets and bridges and ships and river crossings and dams and licenses, on and on and on. The rabbis said that repentance was almost impossible for tax gatherers and customs house officials. Dr. Edersheim sums it up in The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. The customs house official ruled supreme in his insolence and rapacity. Greedy, greedy men. Move on to Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Matthew is a customs official. He is the worst kind of publican. This job was forbidden to Jews by the Pharisees. Publicans were classed with prostitutes. Repentance for publicans was virtually impossible, said the Pharisees. God didn't say that, but the Pharisees did. So this man is the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, an ex-customs house official. So this gives you a peek at the transforming power of God in the life of Matthew, from a greedy, power-hungry, willing tool of the oppressor to a disciple of Jesus the Messiah. That's the transforming power of God. And the transforming power of God can affect you. The transforming power of God can affect your family, all for the better. And now notice his alternate name as we go to verse 27 of Luke 5:27a. After that he went out and noticed a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. Let's move on then. See, that's his alternate name. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he left everything behind and got up and began to follow him. So Matthew takes his chances with Rome. He leaves his tax booth. And I don't know how the Romans reacted to that, but I'm sure there was another man who took his place very quickly. The principle that Matthew is following could be worded like this: Messiah's authority supersedes Rome's. He understands that the Messiah's authority supersedes the authority of Rome. You see, he's been watching Yeshua very closely during his ministry in Galilee, during his preaching tours, and now he is ready to follow. He's been prepared, and he's ready to follow the Messiah. All right, we're lesson 4, page 18 at the top. We come to section 55, the banquet at Matthew's house, covered by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So, Matthew, Levi throws a party. Verse 29, and Levi gave a big reception for him in his house. And there was a great crowd of tax collectors and other people who were reclining at the table with them. So Levi's very excited about being born again. So he throws this party. And as a tax collector, he only has two types of friends: other publicans and sinners. Now Luke says other people. Matthew and Mark calls them sinners. Now the word sinner here is a euphemism for a prostitute. So that's his only friends: publicans and prostitutes. The exception, of course, is Jesus and his disciples. And now that we see that the investigation by the Sanhedrin has begun. They're right there, they're observing, they're asking questions. This is stage 2, the stage of interrogation. So they protest what's going on. This is lesson 4, page 18 in the middle of the page. We pick it up in verse 30. The Pharisees and their scribes began grumbling at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with this tax collectors and sinners?" The Messiah would never associate with this class of society. He can't be the Messiah. He wouldn't associate with such sinners. The response is on page 18, lesson 4 at the bottom, and we pick it up in Matthew 9, verses 12 through 13. But when Yeshua heard this, he said, "It's not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So Messiah's response has 3 points. Is he being sarcastic here? I don't know. But remember, the Pharisees consider themselves quite healthy. So point number 1, the sick need healing. And the publicans and the prostitutes are sin sick. They're sick. And the Pharisees would say, "Yeah, you're right. You're right, not like me." The Pharisees were characterized by much sacrifice and not much mercy. They had very little compassion to extend to the publicans and prostitutes. And thirdly, not the righteous, but the sinners need to be called. And the Pharisees considered themselves righteous. They didn't need to be called to God. So this is the initial conflict with the religious leaders. Let's move on to section 56. This is lesson 4, page 19 at the top. The changed conditions with the Messiah present, explained by 3 illustrations covered by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So let's start with some different definitions. The main issue in the conflict is the Mishnah. So what is the Mishnah? Well, the Mishnah is known as the traditions of the fathers, or the traditions of the elders. That's its title in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. Now, the Mishnah was in development at this time. It was almost completed at this time, but it was still being developed. Now, how did the Mishnah develop? Well, we'll take a quick glance at the history of Jewish oral traditions. We'll look at the approximate date of the tradition, the school, and the principle. We'll begin in 1440 BC with Moses and the Mosaic Law, the written law. This was given by God. That's the basis, 1440 BC. Now, after the Babylonian captivity, a school of scholars existed, the school of the scribes, and they were called the Sopherim, the Sophrim. Sopher is singular. Sopher is Hebrew for scribe. Now, Ezra was the leader. Now, the scribes had an honorable intent at the beginning. The leaders recognized that the reason for the Babylonian captivity was the violation of the Mosaic law, idolatry. The Sophrim expounded the law to make it very clear so that it would not be broken again. Now, the Mosaic law contained 613 commandments. Each commandment was explained very clearly so that no one would break it. As time passed, the Sophrim passed additional laws. Over the next 100 years, these extra laws were intended as a fence protecting the 613 Mosaic commandments. You might run up against the fence and break it, but you wouldn't be breaking a Mosaic commandment, just a tradition. So these laws were developed using pill-pull reasoning or rabbinic reasoning. Now, the school of the Sophrim extends from Ezra to Hillel, approximately 400 BC to 30 BC. Remember the Sophrim, Sofer is scribe. It began with Ezra and his disciples developing principles of interpretation and application only. Now, the basic principle that the Sophrim operated under was a Sofer can disagree with a Sofer, but not with the law of Moses. God gave that. We can't disagree with that. Now, the school of the Sophrim was succeeded by another school around 30 BC. From 30 BC to AD 220, the next school is called the Tanaim. Tana is Aramaic for teacher, or it could also be translated repeater. And they added to the work of the Sophrim. They developed legal regulations. These legal regulations are known as the Mishnah. Now, the principle that the Tanaim worked under was this. A Tana could disagree with another Tana, but not with a Sofer. And the result, the conclusions of the Sophrim became sacrosanct. Their traditions became divine law that had to be obeyed. Now, the Apostle Paul belonged to this school around AD 30. And the approximate date is AD 30 to AD 67. Jesus and Paul were being influenced by this school. Paul is a Tana. Now, in Galatians 1:14, he calls himself a trailblazer. He says, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. Now, literally, the word advancing there in the NASB, literally the word is prokopto, to cut forward, hence to blaze a trail or to cut a pioneer path. Paul was advancing, pushing forward, and outstripping all others in his power and prestige. So the Tanaim applied this term trailblazer to themselves. Now, the work of the Sophrim and the work of the Tanaim produced a work known as the Mishnah, the traditions of the fathers. Now, here's a picture of an English Mishnah. This is my English Mishnah, Danby's Mishnah, a standard volume. And you see how big it is compared to the Bible. That's an entire Bible. So the Mishnah is even greater, has even greater, more information than the Bible in it. It's even bigger than that. Now, the Tanaim needed validation for their laws. So the reasoning developed that on Mount Sinai, 2 laws were given to Moses. Number 1, the written law, passed down in written form. That would be the Torah. That would be the first 5 books of the law, of the Bible. And then the oral law. That was orally passed down, verbally. Now let me quote the Mishnah itself. This is Mishnah Avot 1:1. Moses received the oral Torah from Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great synagogue. The men of the great synagogue were the Sophrim. So the point, God gave us the oral law as well. And the result, the Mishnah became equal in authority to the Mosaic law. Now later, another school developed, the school of the Amoraim. Amora is Aramaic for explainer or interpreter or spokesman. The principle they operated under was an Amora can disagree with an Amora, but an Amora cannot disagree with a Tana. And so the writings of the Tanaim became equal with Scripture. So the Gemara is the work of the Amoraim, and they flourished between 220 AD and 500 AD. So remember, the Sophrim plus the Tanaim, those 2 schools, created the Mishnah. The Mishnah plus the Gemara equals the Talmud. So it is the Amoraim who created the Gemara. And here is a picture of the Talmud. The Talmud is an encyclopedia-sized volume. Very big. You thought the Mishnah was big. And here are a couple pages from a Talmud, just to let you have a look at it. So again, the Amoraim flourished from 220 to 500 AD. All of this was written down from 220 to 500 AD. All right, now we come to Lesson 4, page 19, below the chart, and the result. Now, during Yeshua's day, only the Mishnah, the oral law, existed. During Yeshua's ministry, only the Mishnah was in existence. So this is the battleground between Yeshua and his authorities, the authority of the Mishnah. This is critical to our understanding. So remember, the Mishnah is the oral law. The Gemara is a commentary on the oral law. And in Yeshua's day, only the Mishnah existed. I need to really emphasize that. And the bottom of page 19 of your outline is a short definition of the Mishnah. Lesson 4, page 20 is an article on the Talmud for you to read for yourself. Lesson 4, page 21 is a page from an English Talmud. This is a Talmud, and part of the page has been reproduced there. Lesson 4, page 21 to the bottom, from the bottom through page 22. Page 21 at the bottom through page 22 is an article on the scribes for you. Now, I want you to turn to the table labeled Introduction to Traditional Sabbath Laws. And we'll see what the Rabbi Danziger has to say here. So let's read this together. The Torah places two obligations upon a person with regard to the Sabbath: to remember the Sabbath day, which is fulfilled with the recitation of the prayer and the Kiddush, and to refrain from performing any labor. With the exception of the prohibition of kindling a fire, though, the Torah does not explicitly state what constitutes a labor. However, the Torah prefaces the section describing the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in Exodus 35, with a repetition of the prohibition against performing labor on the Sabbath. From this juxtaposition, the sages derived that the labors prohibited on the Sabbath are those which are necessary for the construction of the Mishkan and the preparation of its components. The Mishnah in chapter 7, verse 2, lists these labors and gives their total as 39. The formulation of these 39 labors is not intended to ban on 39 specific acts of labor, but rather as a ban on 39 categories of labor. And that emphasis is mine. So you just don't have 39 things you got to watch out for. It's much, much broader than that. You got 39 categories to look out for, and what you're doing may fit into one of those categories. They are therefore known as avot melachot, primary labors, literally fathers of labors. Activities whose prohibition is derived from one of these 39 are known as toledot, secondary, or literally descendant labors. And here are the 39 melachot. These are the primary labors: sowing, plowing, reaping, gathering, threshing, winnowing, sorting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing, whitening, combing, dyeing, spinning, mounting the warp, setting to heddles, weaving, removing threads, tying, untying, sewing, tearing, trapping, slaughter, skinning, salting and tanning, tracing lines, smoothing, cutting, writing, erasing, building, demolishing, extinguishing, kindling, striking the final blow, and transferring from domain to domain. Lots to worry about in the traditional law. Lots to worry about in the Mishnah. So in section 56, we come to the battleground, Messiah's authority over tradition. Tradition, not the Bible. Tradition, the Mishnah. So there's a challenge to Jesus. Lesson 4, page 24 at the top, Mark 2:18. John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and they came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" Yeshua's not fasting. He's not following that tradition. Monday and Thursday were the fast days for the Pharisees. He didn't do that. He didn't fast on Monday and Thursday. So he's challenged. So we need to go to the Luke account to look at his response. Luke 5:34 and 35. And Jesus said to them, "You cannot make the attendants of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them, can you? But the days are coming, but the days will come, and when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast in those days." The days will come, and the bridegroom will be taken away. So Yeshua's response is three examples. Example number one is this wedding. At a wedding, you don't fast, you feast. The bridegroom is present. It's a joyous time. It's not appropriate to fast. After his departure, then you can fast. Okay, it's the second example. And he was telling them a parable. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, he will both tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. So example 2 is repairing a garment. You don't put a new patch on an old garment. This is before sanforizing. This is before pre-shrunk cloth. The patch would shrink, would pull the garment together, and the tear would be worse than ever. His point, he did not come to patch up Pharisaic Judaism. And example number 3 deals with wine in verses 37 and 38. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled out, and the skins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. You see, you put new wine into new wineskins, and the wine ferments. And the gases from the fermenting process stretches the wineskin to its maximum. Then, if you pour out that wine that has been fermented and pour additional new wine into that stretched out wineskin, it begins to ferment as well. More pressure. The wineskin can't take all that pressure. The wineskin splits. The wine pours out on the grass, and you lost them both. The fermenting process has caused you to lose them both. So the point, you do not pour new teaching into the old wineskin of Rabbinic Judaism. Now, this is a warning that went unheeded by the Ebionites. These are the Messianic Jews of the 2nd century. It's also a warning that is ignored by segments of the Messianic community today. Don't pour new wine into old wineskins. Now, verse 39. And no one, after drinking old wine, wishes for new, for he says the old is good enough. Now, there's two possible interpretations of verse 39. One is positive and one is negative. You'll have to choose the one that you like the best, because they're pretty even in their importance here. First of all, the negative interpretation deals with their attitude. Their attitude may be that they desire the old and reject the new. They may be desiring the Mishnah and rejecting the Messiah. Or it could be a positive comment. On the other hand, possibly they're comparing Mosaic Judaism, the Mosaic law, to Pharisaic Judaism and saying, if you drink deeply of Moses, you will say that Moses is better than the Mishnah. He may be trying to get them back to the foundation, back to the law of Moses. Okay, you choose which one you like the best. It's up to you. Now, sections 57 through 59 cover the topic, Messiah's authority over the Sabbath. It's a conflict over what the Mishnah has to say about the Sabbath, not over what the Bible has to say about the Sabbath. Now, to the 613 Mosaic laws, other laws were added in the Mishnah. To the Sabbath alone, 1,500 additional laws were added in the Mishnah. The Sabbath also became personified. In the synagogue, we sing a song called L'Chadodi on Shabbat. It's a song welcoming Queen Sabbath. In rabbinic theology, Israel was created for honoring the Sabbath. With the Pharisaic additions, the Sabbath became very, very complex. Now, the Jewish Encyclopedia summarizes the exaltation of the Sabbath in Rabbinic Judaism. This is lesson 4, page 25 at the top. The observance of the Sabbath in all its details is highly extolled in the Rabbinic Haggadah. If all Israel observes 2 Sabbaths, or even 1 Sabbath, in their in all their details, it will immediately be redeemed from exile. The Sabbath is a costly present given by God to Israel. The pleasures of the Sabbath are 1/60th of the delights of the world to come. He who honors the Sabbath with the preparation of delightful things will receive all that his heart desires. His portion will be limitless. His sins will be forgiven. Just observe the Sabbath with enthusiasm. He who eats the 3 prescribed meals on the Sabbath will be saved from the troubles of the Messianic age, from the judgment of Gehenna, from the wars of Gog and Magog. That's a pretty good benefit. Just observe the Sabbath. Had the Israelites observed the first Sabbath in all its details, no nation or tongue could have prevailed against them. So that's the rabbinic exaltation of the Sabbath. And now we come to Lesson 4, page 26 at the top, section 57, a lame man healed in Jerusalem on the Sabbath. We'll pick it up on John 5:1. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. The conflict will be with the Mishnah over the issue of the Sabbath. This will be the third of John's 7 signs. The feast apparently is the Passover. Many manuscripts read the feast, which would be the Passover. It's probably the second Passover in his ministry. Approximately a year and a half has gone by. We come to the purpose of this trip to Jerusalem in Lesson 4, page 26 in the middle, John 5, 2 through 9. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in, was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. Now a man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Yeshua saw him lying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me." Yeshua said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. And it was the Sabbath on that day. On that day. Now, let's take a look at this pool of Bethesda. Here's an overview. We're hovering over the top of Jerusalem here. And the pool of Bethesda is there north of the temple. Let's change our angle a little bit. We're now hovering over the Mount of Olives. And there is the pool of Bethesda, again, north of the temple complex. Let's go on down close. Okay, we've settled down on the Mount of Olives. And we're looking at Jerusalem. You can see the pool of Bethesda right here. This is the first century Jerusalem model. Let's go in a little closer. You can see the corner of the temple on the left side of the picture, and north of the temple is the pool of Bethesda. And finally, here's a close-up of the pool of Bethesda. Now this is a map, a proposed reconstruction of the pool, and we see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 porticos. 4 around the edge and 1 through the middle. And so here's how the pool of Bethesda with its 5 porticos is portrayed in the Jerusalem model. Now here is the pool of Bethesda today. You can visit the area, but you won't see the pool of Bethesda. This is ruins built upon the pool of Bethesda. You have to look downward. Let's take a look downward. There, way at the bottom, is the pool of Bethesda, way down there. And here's another view that I photographed, looking down into the pool of Bethesda. And you can see the stairways leading down to the pool. So that's the pool of Bethesda. So this is the physical healing on the Sabbath of a paralytic, and then followed by instruction to pick up the bed and walk. The instruction will raise the issue to force the leaders to a decision. Obviously, he was carrying a burden. But he was also broke Mishnah Shabbat 1:1. He broke Mishnah Shabbat 1:1, moving something from a private to a public area. And he broke Avot Melachot number 39, transferring from domain to domain, that category of labor. So it's time to introduce you to the intricacies of the Mishnah and Pilpul reasoning. I'm going to get a look at Rabbinic reasoning right now. Carrying out and bringing in anything from one place to another is said, and the authority is X, to be a work and one of the principal works. So the footnote, X, is Maimonides. And therefore forbid by the law, which says thou shalt not do any work. And one of the traditions of the elders is this, and Y is the footnote. Whoever carries anything out, that is, on the Sabbath day, whether in his right hand or in his left or in his bosom or on his shoulder, is guilty, for so carried the Kohathites. And the footnote there is the Mishnah Shabbat, carrying something out. Okay? And particularly it is said, and Z is the footnote, that he that rolls up a bed of the braziers or tinkers, i.e. on the Sabbath day, is bound to a sin offering. And that's in the Babylonian Shabbat, the Talmud. So what Jesus told this man to do was a serious affront to rabbinic tradition, not to the Bible. The first note on Lesson 4, page 26, dealt with transferring from one point to another. Transferring was a principal work, and so it was dissected by rabbinic logic. So here's Mishnah Shabbat 1:1. The types of transfers on the Sabbath are two which are in reality four within, and two which are in reality four outside. How is this so? Then they set up a hypothetical situation to explain it. The poor man is standing outside and the householder inside. The poor man extended his hand inside and placed an object into the householder's hand, or if he took an object from it and brought the object out, the poor man is liable and the householder is exempt. Because the poor man pulled this object carried this object from one domain to the other. The householder didn't do anything, just the poor man. Now we switch saddles here. If the householder extended his hand outside and placed an object into the poor man's hand, or if he took an object out of it and brought that object in, the householder is liable, the poor man is exempt. That's because the householder carried something in or out of the domain. But the poor man didn't, so he's okay. Situation number 3. If the poor man extended his hand inside and the householder took an object from it or placed an object into it, the poor man the poor man, brought that object out, both are exempt because no one did the entire work there. They're both exempt. And 4, if the householder extended his hand outside and the poor man took an object from it or placed an object into it, and the householder brought that object in, both are exempt. They didn't actually carry that object out from inside to outside and vice versa. So the paralytic Yeshua healed was liable. He was guilty of principle number 1 and 2. He had carried his pallet from the private area into the public area without giving it to anyone. Had he remained in the private area and handed his pallet to someone in the public area, they would have both been exempt. That's examples number 3 and 4. All right, now lesson 4, page 28 of your outline. We have an article on the Pool of Bethesda, and that drawing of the proposed reconstruction is there for you. Now at this point, I'd like to say something about the science of textual criticism and the reliability of the text. We're going to take a little bit of a rabbit trail here. All right, we're looking at John 5, 3 and 4, and John chapter 5, verse 7. Now, chapter 5, verse 7 appears in every manuscript. John 5, 7. The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. So John 5:7 appears in every manuscript. It's indisputable. But John 5:3b through 4 appears only in later manuscripts. John 5:3 and 4. In these lay a multitude of those who are sick, blind, lame, and withered. That's in every manuscript. But inside the brackets here, waiting for the moving of the waters, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after stirring up of the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he had been afflicted. This section appears in the NASB in brackets, in the New King James, the King James, and the ASV, all in italics, but it's absent from the RSV, NIV, and ESV. Is it valid to keep it in there? Is it some kind of a corruption of the text, some kind of a change of the text, some kind of a problem? Well, I personally don't have a problem with John 5:3b through 4. John 5:3b through 4 appears to be an accurate explanation added by a scribe of John 5:7. Now here's the rub. Either the teacher, who's ever teaching John 5, either the teacher has to explain verse 7, what was going on there, or the text has to explain verse 7. Without chapter 5:3b through 4, it would be difficult to understand verse 7, so it looks like a scribe said, I'm going to help things out, I'm going to put in a little explanatory note here. So I don't have a problem with that, because it doesn't in any way degrade the text. In fact, it helps explain the text to us. Now, some people wonder about the healing properties, and they debate how the man was healed. Was it natural or was it supernatural? Well, the healing properties were communicated by one camp says the blood of the sacrifices, another says the mineral properties of the water, and another says psychological factors. Jerome Smith, in his New Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, has an answer for all three of those suppositions. First of all, the beasts for sacrifice were not washed here, but in a laver in the temple. So there would be no blood in the water. They weren't washed here in the pool of Bethesda. And besides that, bloody water does not heal anybody. All right, so this is not a naturalistic explanation. Number two, no natural property or psychological factor could cure all manner of diseases. And look, there's the sick, the blind, the lame, the withered. You can't apply one natural property to everything. Some are sick from germs. Some are lame from an injury. Who knows why they're blind, or why has their hand withered? No natural property or psychological factor could cure everything. Maybe one, but not all. 3, the cure only extended to the first who entered. Naturalistic properties would heal everyone who entered. It wouldn't matter. It'd always be there. 4thly, the healings took place only at one particular time. Naturalistic properties would tend to be constant. So the conclusion, as the healing was affected by immersion, it must have been instantaneous. It was never failing in its effects, all of which, not being observed in medicinal waters, determine the cures to have been miraculous, as expressly stated in the text. So I believe this is a miraculous cure. And that I believe that the science of textual criticism has established the text. Now, I'm going to take issue with a book that's come out called Misquoting Jesus, the story behind who changed the Bible and why, because this is an example. The scribes changed the Bible. They added in that section in Matthew 5:3 and 4. It was written by Bart Ehrman, published by HarperCollins. Well, who is Bart Ehrman? Well, you can learn a little bit about him in Wikipedia. In Misquoting Jesus, Ehrman tells how he was a born-again fundamentalist Christian as a teenager. So this is in the book. He recounts being certain of his youthful enthusiasm that God had inspired the wording of the Bible and protected its text from all error. His desire to understand the original words of the Bible led him to the study of ancient languages, particularly Koine Greek, and to textual criticism. During his graduate studies, however, he became convinced that there are contradictions and discrepancies in the biblical manuscripts that could not be harmonized or reconciled. And I'm sure John 5:3b through 4 would be one of those contradictions, discrepancy, or addition that he didn't like. I did my very best to hold on to my faith that the Bible was the inspired Word of God and that with no mistakes, and that lasted for about 2 years. I realized that at the time we had over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament, and no two of them were exactly alike. He's correct. There are thousands of samples of the manuscript. And yes, no two of them are exactly alike. The scribes were changing them, sometimes in big ways, but lots of times in little ways. It finally occurred to me that if I really thought that God had inspired this text, if he went to the trouble of inspiring the text, why didn't he go to the trouble of preserving the text? Why did he allow scribes to change it? Well, I think his thought pattern is misleading himself. The article continues, Bart Ehrman remained a liberal Christian for 15 years, but later became an agnostic atheist after struggling with the philosophical problems of evil and suffering. So please note, according to the quote I read you, Bart Ehrman did not become an agnostic atheist due to textual criticism, to textual variations. He became an agnostic atheist due to philosophical issues, which is a totally different issue. My response to Bart Ehrman is that the science of textual criticism has established the text. Most variances are spelling variations during a time when there were no standardized spelling and no dictionaries. That's the vast majority of them. That should be expected. No doctrine is at risk. Science of textual criticism has substantiated that no doctrine of the Bible is at risk by any variance. If you're interested in exploring this subject in greater detail, I would recommend the book Can We Trust the Gospels? Investigating the Reliability of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John by Mark D. Roberts from Crossway, and Misquoting Truth, a guide to the fallacies of Bart Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus by Timothy Paul Jones, IVP Books. So those books will show you that textual criticism has actually established the text. So I would not recommend you considering Misquoting Jesus by Bart G. Ehrman. Apparently, I haven't read it myself, but I would suggest that it's full of fallacies and errors. So check out the other books. All right, let's see where we are. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time right here. We're at section 58. It's an effort to kill Jesus for breaking the Sabbath and saying he's equal with God, John 5:10 through 18. So I think I'm pretty sure I'm out of time at this point. So we're going to call it quits right now, and we'll pick it up next session with section 58 with this effort to kill Jesus for being a Sabbath breaker. So, as I always say, thanks so much for being our students. I hope these classes are inspiring to you, get you to know Yeshua better, and encourage you to follow him closer. We'll see you next session. Lahitraot. Lahitraot.